A lethal dose of potassium cyanide, enough to stop the hearts of 5 grown men, sits on a silver plate. The basement of the Moika Palace smells of damp stone and chemical poison. Grigori Rasputin, a massive peasant measuring 6 feet 4 inches, sits at a wooden table. He wears a silk blouse. His unwashed hair hangs over a heavily scarred face. Prince Felix Yusupov watches him from across the table. Yusupov points to the pink cakes on the plate. Rasputin reaches out with bare, dirt-caked hands. He grabs 3 cakes. He shoves them into his mouth, chews the pastry, and swallows the laced food. Yusupov sits silently. He waits for the chemical to burn his stomach lining, for violent muscle convulsions to start, for white foam to pour from the peasant's mouth. Minutes pass. The air remains still. Rasputin licks his fingers and asks for Madeira wine. Yusupov pours the wine and drops more cyanide powder into the dark liquid. Rasputin drinks the wine in one gulp. He asks for a second glass, drinks it, burps, and smiles. The cyanide fails to stop his organs. Yusupov walks up the stone stairs to a study, grabs a heavy Browning revolver, checks the ammunition, and walks back down. Rasputin stands near the wall. Yusupov raises the heavy gun, aims the barrel directly at the center of Rasputin's back, and pulls the trigger. The gunshot deafens the room. The lead bullet tears through Rasputin's clothes, shatters a rib, and rips through his stomach and liver. Thick dark blood explodes from the exit wound onto the stone floor. Rasputin collapses onto his back. He lies motionless. Blood pools around his torso. Yusupov checks the carotid artery. No pulse. The breathing has stopped. The peasant is dead. Yusupov leaves the basement. An hour passes. Yusupov returns to inspect the corpse. He leans his face close to the blood-soaked body. Suddenly, Rasputin's eyelids snap open. The green eyes lock onto Yusupov. The dead man releases a guttural roar. Rasputin lunges upward. His heavy hands grab Yusupov's neck. His dirty fingernails dig deep into Yusupov's skin, drawing blood. Yusupov chokes, struggles to breathe, and fights to break the grip. Rasputin rips the heavy epaulette from Yusupov's uniform. Yusupov kicks Rasputin in the chest, breaks free, and runs up the stairs. Rasputin rolls onto his stomach and crawls across the stone floor. His torn liver bleeds profusely, leaving a thick, dark red trail. He pushes the heavy iron door open and drags his frame into the courtyard. The air temperature is 20 degrees below zero. Thick snow covers the ground. Vladimir Purishkevich, another conspirator, runs into the courtyard. He sees the bleeding peasant staggering toward the locked iron gates. Purishkevich raises his pistol and fires. The first 2 bullets miss. Rasputin keeps walking. Purishkevich fires a 3rd time. The bullet strikes Rasputin in the back. Rasputin shudders but does not fall. Purishkevich fires a 4th time. The bullet smashes into the back of Rasputin's skull, tears through the brain tissue, and exits through the forehead. Rasputin crashes face first into the deep snowbank. Purishkevich kicks Rasputin's temple. Yusupov runs into the courtyard holding a 2-pound solid rubber dumbbell. He swings the heavy dumbbell down onto Rasputin's face, shattering the nose cartilage and breaking the cheekbones. He beats the head repeatedly until the face becomes an unrecognizable mass of torn skin, shattered teeth, and freezing blood. The men tie Rasputin's wrists and ankles with heavy hemp rope. They wrap his ruined body in heavy broadcloth, load him into an automobile, and drive to the Petrovsky Bridge. The Neva River is frozen solid. They find a hole cut into the thick ice, drag the bleeding bundle from the vehicle, and throw it into the freezing water. The corpse sinks into the black depths. 3 days later, river police locate the body trapped under the thick ice. A medical examiner performs the autopsy, cuts the body open, examines the organs, and writes the final report. The potassium cyanide did not kill. him. The bullet destroying the liver did not kill him. The bullet destroying the brain tissue did not kill him. The massive blunt force trauma to the skull did not kill him. The examiner finds river water filling the lungs. Grigori Rasputin died by drowning. He fought the freezing water beneath the ice until his lungs filled with liquid, his core temperature plummeted, and his heart finally stopped beating. Heavy leather whips embedded with sharp metal fragments sliced through the air, tearing through the epidermis and ripping the underlying muscle tissue of bare backs. Dark blood splatters onto the wooden walls of a cramped hut deep in the dark Siberian forest. Dozens of men and women from the underground KHLYSTY sect mutilate their own bodies. The extreme tissue damage triggers the release of massive amounts of adrenaline and endorphins in their brains. Grigori Rasputin flogs his own back until his skin hangs in bloody strips. He watches the others bleed. They spin in frantic circles, screaming until their vocal cords tear and their leg muscles give out from lactic acid buildup. The severe physical trauma pushes their bodies into a clinical state of shock. The immense pain gives way to absolute frenzy. The flagellation abruptly stops. The bleeding participants drop the blood-soaked whips. They lunge at each other. The ritual shifts directly from violent self-mutilation to frantic sexual intercourse. They copulate on the hard, bloody wooden floor. Sweat, dirt, fresh blood, and bodily fluids mix together in the intense heat of the fire. They fuck relentlessly until their bodies collapse from complete cardiovascular and muscular exhaustion. Rasputin absorbs this extreme biological ideology. His survival had already been forged as a teenager in Pokrovskoye, a village buried in the frozen wasteland where the -40-degree temperature kills the weak. There, he had been caught by 5 men stealing a draft horse. They swung thick wooden clubs down onto his torso, cracking his ribs. Heavy leather boots shattered his nose cartilage. He had survived that skull-cracking trauma. While wandering thousands of miles across the barren wilderness, severe caloric deficit and chronic physical exhaustion altered his brain chemistry, making him see blood pooling on the snow and hear deep voices. Now, in the bloody KHLYSTY hut, he sees how pain, exhaustion, and sexual climax shatter a person's psychological defenses. He realizes that physical dominance over the flesh provides absolute control over the brain. He lets his hair grow long and matted. He stops washing his body. He walks back to human civilization. He digs a dirty finger into the thick crust of dried blood and dead skin on his arm, lifts it to his nose to smell the sour stench of sweat and secretions, and drags his mud-caked boots onto the cobblestone streets of the capital. A minor bump against a wooden carriage seat ruptures a microscopic capillary inside the knee joint of the 10-year-old boy. Because his blood lacks the essential clotting protein factor VIII, the microscopic tear does not seal. The dark red fluid leaks continuously into the synovial cavity. Within hours, the joint swells to twice its normal size. The skin stretches tightly over the accumulated blood, turning a morbid shade of purplish black. The internal pressure crushes the sensitive nerve endings. Alexei Romanov, the heir to the Russian Empire, screams in pure anatomical agony. His body convulses. His core temperature spikes into a severe fever. The royal physicians inject morphine, wrap the leg in tight bandages, and apply heavy ice packs. Nothing stops the internal hemorrhage. The blood continues to fill the joint, tearing the surrounding muscle tissue apart from the inside. Grigori Rasputin enters the opulent bedroom. He still wears his dirt-stained peasant clothes. He smells of stale sweat and unwashed hair. Tsarina Alexandra stands by the bed, her face pale, her hands shaking. She watches the massive peasant approach the dying boy. Rasputin does not carry medical bags. He does not ask for surgical tools. He walks directly to the bleeding child. He places his heavy, calloused hands heavily onto the boy's burning forehead. Rasputin stares into Alexei's eyes. He lowers his voice to a deep, resonant hum. He speaks in a slow, rhythmic cadence. He strokes the boy's head. The repetitive tactile stimulation and the low-frequency auditory input trigger a parasympathetic nervous system response in the child. Alexei's severe hyperventilation slows down. His racing heart rate drops. As the severe biological stress decreases, the boy's blood pressure plummets. The lower blood pressure reduces the physical force pushing the blood out of the ruptured capillary. The internal bleeding gradually slows to a halt. The excruciating pain subsides. Alexei closes his eyes and falls into a deep, exhausted sleep. The Tsarina falls to her knees. She stares at Rasputin. She does not see a manipulation of the nervous system. She sees a physical miracle. She sees the absolute savior of her son's flesh. Rasputin recognizes the biological control he has just established. He turns his predatory gaze toward the desperate mother. He knows her psychological defenses are completely shattered. Rasputin expands his territory into the high society drawing rooms of St. Petersburg. He uses the exact same sensory manipulation techniques on the wealthy, bored aristocratic women. He corners them in small, unventilated rooms. He uses his massive physical frame to invade their personal space. He grabs their soft hands with his rough, dirt-caked fingers. He stares unblinking into their eyes, triggering an intense adrenaline spike. He breathes heavily onto their necks. He commands them to strip. He forces them to submit to physical exhaustion and violent sexual intercourse, claiming that sinning heavily is the only biological path to purge the flesh. The aristocratic women tear off their silk dresses. They drop to the expensive carpets. They let his filthy fingernails dig into their soft skin. They let him bite their shoulders until blood pools on their collarbones. In the Winter Palace, Tsarina Alexandra dismisses the royal physicians. She orders them to stay away from her son. She hands complete medical control of the heir over to the unwashed peasant. Rasputin walks down the gilded hallways of the palace. He stops in front of a massive gold-framed mirror. He reaches into his filthy beard, pulls out a dead louse, crushes the insect between his thick thumbnails, and wipes the smeared insect blood onto the pristine white silk wallpaper. Grigori Rasputin presses a thick graphite pencil into a sheet of royal stationery. His dirty fingernails press so hard they tear the paper fibers. He scrawls an ungrammatical command to dismiss the Russian Minister of War. He hands the torn paper to Tsarina Alexandra. She takes it immediately. Her pupils are permanently dilated when he is in the room. Her neurochemistry has become entirely dependent on his deep voice, his massive physical frame, and his sour bodily scent. She signs the royal decree. The heavy stamp of the Romanov Empire crashes down onto the wax seal, validating the crude scribbles of a Siberian peasant. The Russian government structure collapses under his biological manipulation. Politicians who refuse to kiss his filthy hands find their careers instantly terminated. He replaces competent state ministers with weak, submissive sycophants who bring him massive bribes. He turns his St. Petersburg apartment into an absolute center of power. Dozens of desperate men and women line up outside his door every morning. They bring thick wads of cash, expensive jewelry, and their own daughters. Rasputin sits on a velvet couch, drinking heavy fortified wine. A wealthy politician pushes his young wife forward to secure a government contract. Rasputin grabs the woman by the jaw. He pulls her face close to his rotting teeth. He inhales the scent of her expensive French perfume. He drags her into the bedroom. He forces her onto the mattress. He does not care about the government contract. He cares only about asserting absolute physical dominance over the Russian elite. He copulates with the wives of generals, ministers, and dukes. He leaves bite marks on their flesh. He leaves them bruised and exhausted. They return to their powerful husbands carrying his bodily fluids and his political orders. Prime Minister Pyotr Stolypin attempts to stop the infection. He compiles a massive secret police file documenting Rasputin's brutal rapes, massive alcohol consumption, and public brawls. Stolypin places the heavy file on Tsar Nicholas's desk. The Tsar reads the violent reports. He feels a severe spike of cortisol in his bloodstream. He summons Rasputin and orders him to leave the capital. Rasputin simply stares at the Tsar. He uses the exact same vocal frequency he uses on the hemophiliac boy. He tells the Tsar that if he leaves, the boy's blood will flow again. The threat triggers immediate panic in the Tsar's amygdala. The Tsar's breathing becomes shallow. His hands tremble. He submits. He allows Rasputin to stay. Months later, an assassin shoots Prime Minister Stolypin in the chest at the Kiev Opera House. The bullet tears through Stolypin's liver. He bleeds out on the theater floor. With Stolypin dead, the final structural barrier falls. Rasputin tightens his grip on the Tsarina. He dictates military logistics, food distribution, and railway schedules. He governs the empire the same way he governs his nocturnal orgies, through raw impulse, violent coercion, and absolute physical indulgence. A high-ranking bishop of the Orthodox Church visits Rasputin's apartment to confront him. The bishop screams at the peasant, calling him a demon. Rasputin does not argue theology. He steps forward and grabs the bishop's heavy gold cross. He yanks the chain, pulling the bishop's neck downward. Rasputin spits a thick wad of phlegm directly into the bishop's face. He kicks the old man in the kneecap, shattering the joint. The bishop collapses onto the wooden floor, clutching his broken leg in agony. Rasputin steps over the screaming priest, walks into his bedroom, and pulls another terrified aristocratic woman onto the dirty sheets. A heavy German artillery shell slams into the frozen mud of the Eastern Front. The violent explosion vaporizes a dozen Russian soldiers. Jagged iron shrapnel tears through human flesh, amputating limbs and destroying internal organs. The remaining infantrymen cower in the deep trench, covered in the fresh blood and torn intestines of their dead commanders. They hold rusted rifles with no ammunition. They wear thin boots filled with freezing mud. The Russian Empire plunges into the industrial meat grinder of World War I. Tsar Nicholas leaves the capital to take direct physical command of the military forces. He abandons the government infrastructure. He leaves the absolute control of the state to Tsarina Alexandra and her biological master, Grigori Rasputin. Rasputin immediately seizes the military command chains. He dictates the deployment of millions of peasant soldiers. He fires experienced logistics officers and replaces them with corrupt sycophants who pay him massive cash bribes. The supply lines completely rupture. Ammunition trains stall on the tracks. Cargo cars filled with raw meat rot in the train yards. At the front lines, Russian soldiers freeze to death. Frostbite kills the tissue in their extremities. Gangrene consumes their toes and fingers. They wrap their bleeding feet in dirty rags. They fight German machine guns with bare fists and wooden trench clubs. The casualty rate reaches catastrophic biological numbers. Hospital tents overflow with screaming men. Military surgeons amputate infected limbs with dull saws and zero anesthesia. They toss the severed arms and legs into massive, bloody piles outside the canvas tents. While the Russian army bleeds out in the snow, Rasputin feasts in Petrograd. He locks himself inside a private dining room at the Villa Road restaurant. He surrounds himself with heavy plates of sturgeon, salted caviar, and roasted meats. He does not use silverware. He digs his bare, dirt-caked hands into the greasy meat, tearing the cooked animal muscle from the bone. He shoves the food into his mouth, chewing violently with his mouth open. The hot grease drips down his thick, matted beard and stains his silk blouse. Dozens of aristocratic women watch him eat. They wait for his command. He orders them to drink heavy glasses of sweet wine until their stomachs reject the liquid and they vomit on the expensive Persian rugs. The military disasters trigger massive riots in the streets of the capital. Starving workers break into bakeries, tearing loaves of bread from the shelves. The state police fire heavy lead bullets directly into the crowds. The projectiles shatter ribs and skulls. Dark blood pools on the cobblestones. The Tsarina ignores the screaming mobs. She locks herself in the Winter Palace, writing frantic letters to her husband at the front. She repeats Rasputin's direct orders. She commands the Tsar to advance the troops, completely ignoring the lack of artillery support. The Tsar obeys. He orders massive infantry charges against fortified German positions. Heavy machine gun fire cuts the Russian peasants in half. Their broken bodies pile up in the muddy craters, rotting in the open air. In the restaurant, Rasputin wipes the animal grease from his mouth using the expensive silk dress of a general's wife. He grabs a heavy glass bottle of Madeira wine and drinks it directly from the neck. The sweet alcohol mixes with the decaying food in his stomach. He drops the empty bottle onto the hardwood floor. It shatters into sharp glass shards. He grabs the general's wife by her hair, yanks her head back exposing her throat, and forces her down onto the heavy wooden table among the half-eaten meat, crushed bones, and spilled wine. A heavy steel blade plunges deep into the abdominal cavity. The sharp metal slices through the thick layers of subcutaneous fat, tears the abdominal muscle wall, and punctures the small intestine. Grigori Rasputin collapses onto the dirt road of his home village. His massive hands press desperately against the open wound, trying to keep his internal organs from spilling out into the dust. Kyania Gusiva, a fanatical former follower, stands over him. She screams that she has killed the Antichrist. She raises the bloody knife to strike his throat. Rasputin grabs a heavy wooden stick from the ground. He swings it with brutal force, smashing the wood into her face. The impact shatters her jawbone. She drops the knife. Rasputin lies in the dirt, bleeding profusely from his gut. The local surgeon operates on him without anesthesia. The doctor sews the torn intestine back together with thick thread. The severe infection causes Rasputin's core temperature to spike into a lethal fever. His body fights off the massive bacterial invasion. Against all biological probability, he survives. The heavy scar tissue hardens over his stomach. He returns to Petrograd. The Okhrana, the Russian secret police, deploys dozens of agents to track his every physical movement. They hide in the shadows outside his apartment. They document his extreme biological excesses. They write detailed reports of his massive alcohol consumption. They record the exact number of hours he spends copulating. They document the bruised and exhausted aristocratic women leaving his bedroom at dawn. The Okhrana compiles thousands of pages detailing his violent rapes, public brawls, and raw physical dominance over the Russian elite. The agents deliver the heavy stacks of paper directly to the Tsarina's desk. Tsarina Alexandra refuses to read the ink. Her neurochemistry is permanently bound to his physical presence. She views the Okhrana reports as a satanic conspiracy. She dismisses the police chiefs who dare to present the biological facts. She orders the secret police to act as Rasputin's personal bodyguards. The men assigned to investigate his crimes are now forced to protect his flesh. Rasputin realizes he has achieved absolute immunity. The state apparatus meant to destroy him now serves him. He intensifies his sensory indulgence. He stops trying to hide his nocturnal activities. He invites high-ranking government officials to his apartment to watch him humiliate their wives. He demands massive cash payments to secure military promotions, stuffing the dirty paper money into his pockets. He drinks until his liver struggles to process the toxicity. His physical body becomes a conduit for raw, unchecked power. The more violent and degraded his actions become, the more the Tsarina worships his flesh. She touches the thick scar tissue on his abdomen, believing the healed flesh is absolute proof of his divine biological nature. Rasputin stands in the center of his crowded apartment. The room smells heavily of cheap tobacco, spilled wine, and human sweat. A desperate general hands him a thick envelope of cash to avoid deployment to the Eastern Front. Rasputin takes the money. He unbuttons his silk blouse, exposing his massive, hairy chest and the jagged, red scar running across his stomach. He grabs the general's hand and forces the man's trembling fingers deep into the thick, uneven scar tissue. Rasputin stares unblinking into the general's terrified eyes, spits a mouthful of dark wine onto the wooden floor, and orders the man to kneel. A heavy hemp rope snaps violently taut against the cervical vertebrae of a dissenting journalist. The sudden physical force crushes the trachea and snaps the spinal cord. The man's body spasms in the freezing air before hanging limp. The Okhrana, acting as Grigori Rasputin's personal enforcers, eliminates anyone who speaks against the Siberian peasant. Secret police agents drag politicians from their beds, beat them with heavy wooden batons, and exile them to the frozen wastelands of Siberia. The state apparatus no longer protects the empire. It exists solely to protect Rasputin's flesh. Tsarina Alexandra orchestrates this massive structural purge. Her neurochemical dependency on the peasant has completely rewritten her cognitive functions. She does not see a corrupt, alcoholic rapist. She perceives a flawless biological savior. Every minister who attempts to present the Tsarina with factual evidence of Rasputin's extreme sexual violence is immediately stripped of their rank. She demands absolute, unblinking loyalty to his physical presence. When a highly decorated army general presents her with photographs of Rasputin copulating with underage prostitutes, she orders the general's immediate arrest. She commands the police to destroy the photographic evidence. She locks herself in her private chambers, burning the physical photographs in the fireplace. She breathes in the toxic smoke, refusing to let the visual data enter her brain. Her obsession reaches clinical levels. She collects Rasputin's bodily artifacts. She saves his fingernail clippings. She preserves his dirty, unwashed shirts, inhaling the sour stench of his dried sweat to calm her central nervous system. She orders the Tsar, who is hundreds of miles away at the Eastern Front, to physically interact with these biological tokens. She mails him a dirty wooden comb completely coated in Rasputin's grease and dandruff. She commands the Emperor of Russia to drag the filthy teeth of the comb through his own hair before making critical military decisions. She believes the thick animal grease on the wood contains the raw electrical energy of the peasant's brain. The Tsar obeys. Standing in a mud-filled trench surrounded by the rotting corpses of Russian infantrymen, the Emperor pulls the greasy wooden comb through his hair. The structural collapse of the Romanov dynasty accelerates. The aristocracy watches in pure biological terror. They see the supreme ruler of their massive empire subjugated by the dandruff and sweat of an illiterate horse thief. The nobles gather in secret, heavily guarded cellars. They realize that legal and political mechanisms cannot stop the infection. Rasputin has hijacked the biological control center of the royal family. A group of high-ranking aristocrats, including Prince Felix Yusupov and Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, sits in a dark, poorly ventilated room. They breathe in stale cigar smoke and drink heavy glasses of vodka. They stop discussing political exile. They recognize that a cancer cannot be reasoned with. A parasite must be physically excised from the host. They look at the anatomical charts of the human body. They study the lethal dosages of potassium cyanide. They calculate the exact amount of chemical poison required to violently shut down the internal organs of a massive, 200-pound man. They document how the powder burns the stomach lining and suffocates the heart muscles. Yusupov slams a heavy glass vial of white powder onto the oak table. He stares at the deadly chemical, preparing to bake it into pink pastries. A heavy granite pestle crushes crystalline potassium cyanide against a stone mortar. The violent friction grinds the lethal chemical into a fine white powder. The microscopic dust particles fill the air, emitting a sharp odor of bitter almonds. Dr. Stanislaus de Lazavert wears thick rubber gloves. He carefully scoops the toxic dust into a small glass vial. Prince Felix Yusupov and Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich watch the chemical preparation in absolute silence. They understand the biological mathematics. A fraction of a gram of this powder will completely paralyze the cellular respiration process. It will prevent blood from carrying oxygen to the brain. It will trigger massive internal convulsions, suffocate the heart muscles, and terminate human life within 3 minutes. Yusupov knows he cannot rely on political force to trap the peasant. He must weaponize Rasputin's extreme biological addictions. Yusupov uses his own wife, Princess Irina, as the sexual bait. He tells Rasputin that Irina wants to meet him alone in the basement of the Moika Palace. Rasputin's hyperactive libido instantly overrides his basic survival instincts. He receives daily death threats. He knows the aristocracy wants to butcher him. Yet, the promise of violating the richest and most beautiful woman in Russia floods his brain with dopamine. He accepts the invitation. In the Moika Palace, Yusupov prepares the kill room. The basement is a heavy stone vault with no windows. The walls are thick enough to muffle gunshots and human screams. Yusupov places a heavy wooden table in the center. He arranges a silver platter of pink pastries. Dr. Lazavert takes a medical syringe. He injects concentrated liquid cyanide directly into the center of each cake. He pours more poison into the bottom of crystal wine glasses. They arrange the laced food perfectly. They load heavy lead bullets into their Browning revolvers. They check the mechanical action of the firing pins. They wait. In his apartment, Rasputin prepares his body. He does not wash off the days of accumulated sweat and grime. He simply pulls a heavy silk blouse over his unwashed torso. He combs the thick animal grease through his matted beard. His liver is already saturated with heavy alcohol. His central nervous system operates on pure adrenaline and predatory anticipation. He walks out into the freezing Petrograd night. The air temperature plunges below zero. He climbs into Yusupov's waiting automobile. The car drives to the Moika Palace. Rasputin steps out into the snow. He walks down the heavy stone stairs into the windowless basement. He breathes in the damp, stagnant air. Yusupov locks the heavy iron door behind them. The biological trap snaps shut. Rasputin looks around the empty room. He does not see Princess Irina. He sees only the wooden table, the crystal glasses, and the silver plate of pink cakes. He sits down heavily on a wooden chair. His massive frame towers over the table. He stares at the pastries. His stomach secretes digestive acids, anticipating the sugar. He does not know the chemical compound waiting inside the icing is designed to violently shut down his heart. He licks his dirty lips and reaches his thick, calloused hand toward the silver plate. A massive dose of potassium cyanide enters the stomach cavity. The toxic chemical rapidly mixes with the highly concentrated gastric acids. Under normal biological conditions, the cyanide should instantly paralyze the enzymes responsible for cellular respiration. However, Rasputin's stomach is heavily saturated with thick, sugary wine and half-digested starches. The massive amount of unrefined sugar drastically slows down the chemical absorption rate. The poison fails to reach his bloodstream in lethal concentrations. Grigori Rasputin continues to chew the laced pastries. He swallows the toxic heavy wine. His heart beats at a steady, rhythmic pace. His lungs pull oxygen from the damp basement air. He burps loudly, his breath smelling of bitter almonds and stale alcohol. Prince Felix Yusupov watches the biological impossibility unfold. His own nervous system begins to collapse under the intense psychological stress. His hands tremble. He breathes in rapid, shallow gasps, suffocating from panic. Yusupov retreats up the stone stairs. He grabs a heavy Browning revolver. He checks the lead bullets in the rotating cylinder. He walks back down into the basement. Rasputin stands by the wall. Yusupov raises the heavy gun. He aims the steel barrel directly at the center of Rasputin's chest. He pulls the trigger. The firing pin strikes the primer. The gunpowder detonates. A heavy lead bullet explodes from the barrel. The projectile pierces Rasputin's silk blouse. It shatters a rib, tears through his stomach wall, and completely destroys the left lobe of his liver. Massive internal bleeding begins immediately. Dark red blood violently erupts from the exit wound, splashing onto the stone floor. Rasputin collapses onto his back. The massive physical trauma causes his brain to temporarily shut down. He lies motionless. Yusupov presses his trembling fingers against Rasputin's thick neck. He feels no pulse. The breathing has stopped. Yusupov leaves the basement, believing the physical threat is neutralized. An hour later, Yusupov returns to inspect the corpse. He leans close to the blood-soaked torso. Suddenly, the biological system of the peasant reboots. Adrenaline violently floods Rasputin's bloodstream, restarting his heart. His eyelids snap open. His green eyes lock onto the assassin. A guttural, inhuman roar tears from his vocal cords. Rasputin lunges upward. His massive, dirt-caked hands lock around Yusupov's throat. His thick fingernails dig deep into Yusupov's neck, severing the capillaries. Yusupov chokes, his face turning purple from oxygen deprivation. Rasputin rips the heavy military epaulet off Yusupov's uniform. Yusupov kicks Rasputin in the chest, breaks the suffocating grip, and runs screaming up the stone stairs. Rasputin rolls onto his stomach. The ruptured liver leaks thick, coagulating blood onto the floor. He drags his heavy body across the stones. He pushes open the heavy iron door and crawls into the freezing courtyard. The temperature is 20 degrees below zero. Thick snow covers the ground. Vladimir Purishkevich runs into the courtyard. He raises his Savage pistol and fires at the bleeding peasant. 2 bullets miss. The third bullet strikes Rasputin in the back, tearing through muscle tissue. Rasputin shudders but keeps moving toward the iron gates. Purishkevich fires a 4th time. The lead bullet smashes directly into the back of Rasputin's skull. The projectile shatters the occipital bone, tears through the cerebellum, and exits through the forehead. Brain tissue splatters onto the snow. Rasputin crashes face-first into the deep snowbank. Yusupov sprints into the courtyard wielding a 2-pound solid rubber dumbbell. He swings the heavy weapon down onto Rasputin's skull. He strikes the nose, shattering the cartilage. He strikes the cheekbones, snapping the facial structure. He beats the head repeatedly until the face dissolves into an unrecognizable mass of torn skin, shattered teeth, and freezing blood. The newly formed revolutionary government orders the immediate destruction of Grigori Rasputin's flesh. Soldiers dig his decomposing corpse out of the frozen earth. They drag the heavy body into the woods. They build a massive pyre of pine logs, throw the corpse onto the wood, and douse the decaying flesh in heavy gasoline. A single match ignites the fuel. The intense thermal energy violently boils the remaining water inside the corpse. As the fire consumes the muscle tissue, the tendons in his legs and torso shrink rapidly. The severe biological contraction causes the burning corpse to suddenly bend at the waist and sit up in the middle of the flames. The soldiers step back in pure neurological terror. The dead peasant appears to move. They beat the burning body back down with heavy iron shovels until the bones dissolve into white ash. Rasputin is incinerated, but the biological infection he implanted into the Russian Empire proves fatal. The massive structural collapse he engineered triggers the Bolshevik Revolution. The state apparatus shatters completely. Starving mobs tear government officials apart in the streets. The Tsar is forced to abdicate. In July 1918, the Bolshevik secret police lock Tsar Nicholas, Tsarina Alexandra, the hemophiliac heir Alexei, and the 4 Grand Duchesses in the damp basement of the Ipatiev house in Ekaterinburg. It is a stone basement, identical in its cold, unventilated structure to the kill room in the Moika Palace. Yakov Yurovsky leads a squad of executioners into the room. They carry heavy Nagant M1895 revolvers and Mauser pistols. Yurovsky reads a brief execution order. Before the Tsar can process the auditory information, Yurovsky raises his heavy pistol and fires a lead bullet directly into the Tsar's brain. The projectile shatters the frontal bone and destroys the prefrontal cortex. The Tsar collapses instantly. The execution squad unleashes a chaotic storm of hot lead into the confined space. The massive volume of gunfire deafens the executioners. The bullets tear through the Tsarina's skull, spraying bone fragments and brain tissue onto the brick wall. The executioners turn their weapons on the children. The heavy lead bullets strike the Grand Duchesses but ricochet violently. The girls have sewn pounds of solid diamond jewelry into their corsets, creating unintended ballistic armor. The bullets tear their flesh but fail to penetrate their vital organs. The girls scream in absolute anatomical agony, bleeding heavily onto the stone floor. Yurovsky realizes the ammunition is failing. He orders his men to use cold steel. The soldiers attach heavy steel bayonets to their Mosin-Nagant rifles. They step forward and plunge the sharp blades into the girls' chests. They stab the bleeding children repeatedly, driving the steel through their ribs and deep into their lungs and hearts. The hemophiliac boy, Alexei, lies on the floor, bleeding from a gunshot wound to the leg. Yurovsky walks over to the terrified child. He presses the hot barrel of his pistol directly against the boy's temple. He pulls the trigger twice. The heavy lead obliterates the boy's skull. The royal bloodline is physically terminated. Yurovsky kicks a shattered piece of the Tsar's parietal bone out of his path. He kneels beside the mutilated torso of the Grand Duchess. He reaches into the massive chest wound, his fingers slipping on the fresh blood and torn lung tissue. He rips a diamond necklace from the shattered ribs. He grabs the girl by her ankles and drags her ruined corpse across the stone floor, leaving a thick, dark red smear. He dumps the heavy body into the mud outside, leaving the exposed flesh to the freezing wind and the swarming flies.